Welcome to the Better Never Ends podcast. We've made it our mission to share with you the expertise and wisdom of role models and leading experts in their field, teaching us about how we can be better, telling stories about their journey to better, inspiring you to discover yours. Okay, today we have a very special episode. This is our first digital episode, or at least not in-person episode, for about 2 years. We're inviting Nick Hanna onto the show, who is a physiotherapist, an educator, and an all-round pretty awesome guy. I've been following his stuff for many, many years. In fact, I spent the morning going back over some of his really old stuff, and yeah, it's really good stuff. So the focus of today's session is going to be on chronic pain. And these days we call it persistent pain, but I think most people who have it probably still refer to it as chronic pain. So we're going to use both of our interests in the subject to go on a bit of a deep dive into the subject. I've got a few questions, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be freewheeling it all the way. So I really wanted to start off on something hopefully this is a positive spin on what could be a pretty depressing and difficult problem here. We know that chronic pain is one of the biggest problems and issues worldwide, right? It costs governments, it costs the public billions and billions. So many people suffer with it day in, day out. So it's a pretty tough subject. But can people get better from chronic pain, Nick?
Wow, yeah, what a great start. Going very high level. I think to answer that question, you need to consider just what we are as human beings, and we are these complex biological systems, right? And so any complex system is adaptable, and really the sum is greater than the parts. So the nature of any complex system is that I think one of its constants is change. I think we're constantly changing. And so I think the message that we can unpack today through our discussion is that in many cases, chronic pain, persistent pain can change. And to what degree that change happens, I think we can call into question perhaps, but I think any change can be good change in one way or another. So the beauty of who we are as people and these biological systems is that we do have to understand that we carry a history, and I think we have a story, each of us individually, and you need to, as a clinician, but even as a person living with persistent pain, really think about your history, your story, and all the factors that have led up to the point where you are now. And there's a reason that the system is in a point of persistent pain and where it is now, and perhaps the history can explain that and you can unpack that a bit. But to pretend that things can't change would be to deny that biological living things don't change, which is just silly.
And I think this draws to one of your first ever posts. And look, I went right back to the start, Nick. So I spent a very interesting morning doing some extra research. And one of your first ever posts, which was essentially comparing a mechanized machine to a human being and really drawing the differences between the two. You cannot treat a human like a machine. And that just goes to show, firstly, that humans and living beings can change on their own, but also that we cannot just fix it like we can a machine. I think it draws on those two concepts there. And you're also referencing the term system, which I've found myself using more and more these days when I'm talking about pain, because I know that it isn't just pain. There is a whole myriad of symptoms and things that go on and exist because it is a functioning system that ultimately is there to protect us in the end. And a chronic pain system is one that has malfunctioned and thinks it needs to protect when perhaps the evidence isn't there anymore that protection is needed. So one thing I would like to follow up then is, because the reason I asked you that question first is because as a physio, I come across a lot of times that people keep talking about managing pain, which I understand. We do have to help people manage their pain,
Sure.
but sometimes that misses the hope of truly getting better. And there are a handful of cases in my career, probably a couple a year, where people fully get better and have no pain after having chronic pain for many, many years. So I always want to remind people in my practice that I can't guarantee it's going to be you, but please do go into this thinking that you could be one of those people that gets better. And if you aim at this moonshot of, I'm going to be the person who is completely pain-free, even if you miss high, you're still missing. You might still have a bit of pain, but your life is so much better than it is compared to when you started.
Yeah, beautiful.
So,
I wanna unpack a couple things you said there, because, and maybe challenge you a little bit too, because I have been thinking about this. But the first thing you started with was really speaking to one of the big faults I think that a lot of people carry in terms of how, or the lens within which they view how they're going about changing or improving their persistent or chronic pain. And you're so right. If you view your body like a machine, in other words, how you're going to change it is you're going to go about it like a mechanic. You're going to find somewhere in there the fault that's wrong, that's the cause of my pain. There's so many reasons why this doesn't work. And what I would challenge people instead to do is view their approach to changing their persistent pain more like I've said this before, more like a gardener. So because we are a complex system, the system will self-organize and change based on the inputs we give it. And that those inputs can come from the environment, they can come from inside here, inside your head, they come from your body. So really, you were getting to one of the purposes of pain, which is, really this internal protective mechanism, this protective system that responds to real or perceived threat. And so if you create the conditions to reduce the perception of threat, then that's a huge step that you can take towards rechanging how the system responds. So if you view your body more like a mechanic, though, it's a weird, I've thought about this, Charlie. It's almost like you preclude responsibility for what's happening. In other words, you go to someone like you would drop your car off to a shop, and then you're like, okay, like do what you need to do to fix me. Almost pretending like you have no role in what's happening in your body. Meanwhile, it's you. This is your body, your life. Whereas viewing it more like a gardener that acknowledges that there are tons of variables and things are constantly changing, but knowing that your body knows what to do if you give it the right set of variables, right set of conditions to allow it to self-organize and solve itself. So you said something before where the system can malfunction and create a heightened set of responses, or a perceived set of responses to threat, and the need for protection goes up. But I almost wonder, like, is it malfunctioning, or is it because there's this positive feedback loop that's gone over and over and over for many years, that it is learning just to get better and more sensitive to the perceived threats? Because if I'm a person who's living with chronic pain and I've been through years of challenge and hell, and nobody can tell me what's wrong, nobody can figure out the precise problem or why I'm still this way, nobody can tell me why the treatments I've tried so far have not helped me. To me, I'm going to be a person who's living in this uncertainty. I'm going to be fearful. I'm going to be worried. I'm going to be scared about the future. I'm going to be questioning whether I can change at all and suffering through it all. And so I almost wonder, is my system malfunctioning, or is my system just highly sensitive or highly productive at what it's supposed to be doing? In other words, its thresholds and its set point to respond have become highly sensitized. And that's what I think is actually happening. I don't think it's malfunctioning. I think it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. But the conditions I'm giving the system are encouraging it to become even better at what it's doing. So what do you think about that?
It's almost functioning, but through the wrong lens. So through a lens of suffering and through a lens of fear. And this actually draws on some of the work through the Explain Pain team, who talk about safety versus danger. If there's safety that you're viewing the lens through, then there's less need to protect through whatever it might be: pain, anxiety, depression, whatever the system perceives as appropriate functioning in that environment. Whereas if there's danger being perceived at all times, then of course it's going to protect you, and it's using its best guess at all times, right? It doesn't mean it's real; it's its best guess. I know that you've used that parallel as well. So that therefore leads us to the beliefs of the person, right? It's heavily reliant on the beliefs of the person based on what that person is viewing and experiencing. How do they perceive that, and what do they believe about those perceptions? So what might you say? You have someone who's coming in who is seeing their world through a lens of fear and danger, and pain is a byproduct of that. What are the kind of things you might work with or speak to that person about beliefs?
Yeah, hope. Or even if they don't believe in hope, start with hypotheticals, just so that I can start.
Curiosity as well.
Yeah.
Some level of curiosity.
Well, I think the most fascinating, one of the most fascinating things we can do as clinicians, or if you're a person working with any other person, is trying to get to know them. Because, people are pretty fascinating. They're complex. They have amazing histories. They have values and wants and goals in life. And the more you can really get to know them on that personal level, the more you can be of service to them in finding their way back to, maybe that's not the best narrative, but forging a new path to the person that they can become, away from the person that was. Because as we started with, the only constant is change. Your body will, and you will, move one way or another depending on the variables, the constraints, the environment, the social life, the movements, the health-related behaviors that you give it. And so what we really need to be encouraging is nudging people towards safety, which is health-related behaviors. Maybe it's a better night's sleep. Maybe it's more water. But anything that is a perception to the system that you are creating a more robust, resilient, adaptive state, then if you tilt the system more towards safety, theoretically, you are creating the conditions to lessen their overall pain and their pain and protective response. It's never guaranteed, as you said, but if we don't create the conditions, we'll never know. Clinical practice with persistent pain is beautiful in the sense that we have so many avenues to create change. And I think we need to start where people feel they can. And it's kind of funny, but it's glorified guess and check, right? Like, let's try this out. let's see if we can create some improvements in this area and see if the system responds differently, and then go from there.
The trial and error concept, I think, works very well in my brain. It's like, I know there are dozens and dozens of different potential ways of helping you, and I'm going to try the ones I think have got the best chance of working based on my experience and based on the things you've told me. And if that doesn't work, we can try some others, we can try some others, we can try some others. And actually this is a more recent post that you put, is that sometimes that's hard for people in pain. They want certainties. They want to be told, this is what your problem is, this is how we're going to get you better, and this is what it's going to cost you. And a lot of the time, people saying that, they're not being genuine. That's not the truth. It's uncertain. And once we can embrace the uncertainty, and we can do that with confidence to a person, I've often called it confidently sitting on the fence. If I can confidently sit on the fence and get that across to a person, and give them both options at the start, or the several options at the start, they don't mind then when the first option doesn't work exactly how we wanted it to go, because I've already prepped them for that. I've already explained that there are some other ways that we'll try. This isn't a guarantee. But often younger in my career, for sure, and I know this happens with other clinicians, you want to give people certainties. You want to give people guarantees because you want them to leave with hope. But you could just, as much as hope is powerful, if you let them down and it doesn't work out, it's a long way back to build that trust back up again.
The irony being, though, that if you are so hell-bent on a certain treatment and a certain narrative and a certain explanation for why, if you reduce it, use that biomedical reductionistic single factor kind of thinking, then, and that fails, which, I mean, if we look at literature in chronic pain and treatments, nothing does remarkably well. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's no single treatment that's going to outperform another, because the individual in front of you has certain set of conditions that need to be met. So the irony, Charlie, is that if we set up this narrative of certainty and instill this hope and then fail, it only serves to foster further uncertainty when it fails. And so it's that, again, back to the complex system, right back into the positive feedback loop. It's just like, oh my gosh, well, that didn't work. So again, I just keep thinking about back pain because I love working with persistent back pain, but it's like, oh, the core stability approach didn't work. So like, oh, there must be something in there that's missing, more fear, more anxiety, more stress, and then a system that is learning, because of all these things that we've given it, to heighten its sense of protection, which only serves to reinforce more pain or make the system set point that much more sensitive. And so it's just so funny how, if we're not careful, we are actually perpetuating the problems that we're trying to solve. And I don't think people are being malicious about how they're approaching things. I really don't. I think people are trying to help people as much as they can. But I have nightmares about like starting my practice and thinking back to the ways that I would have interacted with people. And who knows? Like I could have, you really don't want to, you don't want to increase vigilance. You don't want to increase this sense of, I'm something's wrong. Something's very scarily, dangerously wrong when, and I should clarify, caveat, when all the evidence points to the fact that there probably isn't anything like that. The body's responding just as it should.
I also like what you were getting at there of, there isn't really an us being the superior clinicians, right? And there's not a them either. There is just a lot of people trying their best, and some use methods that perhaps aren't as effective as others. But I would imagine day in, day out in their practice, they're thinking, how can I help these people in front of me? I'll use my methods. It just so happens those methods may not be as effective. And I don't like the way that sometimes social media can demonize individuals and tell them that they are wrong, because I don't think that's the way you then encourage change in that person either. And whether that person is ready to change or not is a whole nother factor, but I just don't believe that that's the right way about it. I think having conversations more generally like this is a more effective way of just providing different ways of thinking, different educational platforms, ways where people can access it safely and not feel demonized.
Yeah, that's so important. And as I feel like I haven't grown up, but as I continue to age and maybe get a little bit wiser with just life in general here, Charlie, but don't want this to become a therapy session. However, I think, again, when dealing with any complex system, I keep coming back to those words, but the nature of them is that there's always going to be more to study. There's always going to be more that we never know. And so I think if we can just let some of the egos, or put our egos aside, and gosh, I see a lot of arrogance at times. And the reality is, like, you need to be humble and just remember that there is no superior method. There is no superior approach in treating an individual with persisting pain. And we could even, like, the fun bit too is we have no idea how, if we have a positive impact on pain, how the hell that happened. And you never will. You never will. Like, you can speculate, even if you're doing a tissue-based approach. If you're doing some sort of deep tissue manual therapy approach where you're massaging a tissue, you might think you're having a local effect, but then you dismiss the fact, like, oh, well, maybe they're just confident and feel safe with me treating them, and maybe that created a positive impact. Maybe there's a descending modulatory effect from central pain mechanisms top down, creating a local effect. Maybe there is just, it's a chance for this person to get away from the stress of their life. They're laying horizontal on a table face down. They're taking some deep breaths, and it's just a safe, relaxing environment, and that's creating the effect. So for me to walk away from a session making it about me, like, oh, I did that thing, I created that positive effect in their body from something local that I did, is just insanity. It's wild. I would never feel so confident clinically that I was certain about the positive impact and the absolute effect that I had on that person, because I'll never know. I hope that I will stay humble forever moving forward. And I know I will, because certainly the nature of our areas of practice here, Charlie, is the more we learn what we don't know. And the more we can be okay with that, I think. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I often think knowing a little bit sometimes creates a bit of a dangerous effect where you feel like you're certain.
This is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
You just have more to go. Like,
Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? You get this big spike in confidence early in your career. Right. And then relatively soon after, most people then have this crash down into the valley of despair because they realize that there's so much they don't know. But most younger clinicians have that moment, like, whoa, I'm a good physio. You get a couple of wins. God, I know what I'm doing here. Yeah. Something just rips the rug from out under your feet, and then you crash down into that valley of despair, and then you spend your career on this path of enlightenment up to good quality clinical skill and practice, where you do start to feel confident again. And also just want to draw back to some of the ways that I practice as well, which, because I'm not always sure what's going to work and I don't care, I use this kind of analogy of the kitchen sink approach. I'm going to throw everything at it and the kitchen sink. I don't mind what works. My ego doesn't mind what it is that actually did work. I'm just going to keep throwing stuff. Something's going to stick, and I don't really mind what it is. There'll be times when I might pick and choose when I use it, but I'm not bothered which works in the end. I'm just happy if something works. And I think that draws on that humility of just leave the ego at the door. What does this person need from me in order to help them feel better?
Yeah. Well, and you're speaking to too, the nature of being a living biological system is that if you give it the right inputs in one direction, it will change. It really will. So we just can't guarantee that the changes that we're impacting will necessarily have an effect on the pain system, and that's okay. But there are, I think, a series of principles that you can always carry with you in any rehabilitative setting that you should feel confident that you're heading in the right direction. So, I mean, anything that helps the biological system become healthier, more resilient to stress, more robust and adaptive, even just from like a sleep, nutrition, recovery perspective, anything that gives the system a healthier state overall, in theory, you are, as using your words here, you're throwing the right kitchen sink to create a perception of safety, which is, again, if we want to really simplify chronic pain, you just look at it like a balance scale between danger and safety, or perceived threat or perceived safety, and you just want to go more towards safety. It doesn't mean that you eliminate how the system functions. Like, there's going to be stressors and threats and things in your life. That's just part of being alive. But we're trying to normalize the response of said system. And so, again, if you are healthier, more robust, more resilient, giving those variables that would encourage a safe state, then the protective system should respond less. You should have less pain. And so what could that look like clinically? Well, it could be a million things. It could be increasing, a relative joint's range of motion, giving it more movement options and variability. If your joint can move through a fuller range of motion and you can increase the strength around a joint, that's probably a good thing. That's probably, it will give you options for more safety, more variability, and more approaches that you can navigate the world. That's a good thing. But if you change how you think about how your body's pain is responding, again, if you understand that it is a protective response and that it is a system that is wired to keep you safe, then you don't have to be fearful of that pain, because pain is scary, it's distressing. And if you change just the way you think about it and understand it, in theory, you'll have less of a response. So there are all these cool options that we can follow. Again, we don't want to get bogged down. As you said, I'm like you. I don't really care. I don't really attach myself to any one system or one approach, or think one superior or another, because I'm more, I guess I spend much more time just thinking about the person in front of me and what they're telling me they need, and then responding with my individual skill set to help deliver on what they need. And if you do that, one, I think you're being a better clinician, but two, then you don't have an ego involved. Just like, God, get off social media and focus on your people instead. I promise it'll serve you well.
And you've got a whole set of principles that we can follow. And look, some of these, you're right, some of these are universal. Being healthier may not instantly make you feel better overall, but it sure is going to be a good thing anyway. So sometimes there's a lot of things that, as we're throwing different things and getting them to consider different ways of change, even if their pain doesn't change, they're likely going to be living a bit better anyway. They're likely going to be feeling a bit better in another aspect of their life. And they're likely going to be feeling a bit more positive about the approach and about living healthier. So there's these kind of almost like these knock-on effects that happen that encourage people to stick with it. Because we both know the vast majority of cases do take many, many months, sometimes years, to get to their end destination, if they ever do. So
yeah,
to get people going in the meantime, if they get a bit stronger and feel better for that, I'm okay with that. And I hope they are too. That's normally one of the wins. It's like, hey, look, your pain's the same, but look how much better you're doing. That's a relative improvement. You are living your life better despite pain. It's something I'll say in my sessions a lot. It's like, hey, look at what you're doing now despite your pain. Instead of living because of it and living in fear of it, you're now closing the door. This is another thing I'll often say. You've now closed the door on your pain. It's still there, screaming away inside, but you're not listening to it in the same way you were before. If you look for it, it'll be there, but you're now focusing more on what brings you joy in life, what makes you feel better, what makes you healthier. And these things are all really powerful in general, right? And I think that's what you're getting at, the universal truths of healthcare.
Well, the nature of that too is if you're improving your overall quality of life and pain hasn't changed so much, that's okay. It just means you are headed in the right direction. Like you're walking up that mountain. Sure, maybe the actual changing of pain is at the summit. Maybe. I use that analogy a lot, but it's just evidence to you that you are on the right track. So do not stop doing what you're doing. You are on the right track. And that's, again, what else you're speaking to there, Charlie, is the nature of time here. And biology doesn't give a shit about how fast you want things to change. And we live in this instant gratification society now where you can get anything and everything with one click of a button. And so we have these prior experiences now that, everything needs to happen yesterday. And that's just not how your body changes. And I go back to that mechanic analogy. Well, that's another problem. You just think you can go to the shop, they'll put the new part in, they'll fix you up, and then boom, done. We're fixed. We're good to go. But it's far and away different from being a gardener. Like, how long does it take to grow a garden? It takes a whole bloody season to get the yield.
And beyond, probably took me 3 or 4 years to get my grass
That's right.
where I wanted it to be.
You're growing a tree farm. You want fruit. Well, it's happening, 5-6 years from now. So does that mean that you shouldn't be doing the things now today that are going to be in service of years down the road? So yeah, I often question so much, Charlie, like how many of these people just haven't given enough time or the right dosage sufficiently over time to see what they want to see.
I heard someone talk about this in another context, and they said, have you done enough reps? Everyone knows if you're in the gym or going out and doing your running, you want to perform to a certain time, you want to beat a PB, or you want to lift a certain weight, grow your muscles in a certain way. You cannot achieve those things unless you've done the reps. And the same exists within the paradigm of chronic pain recovery. Have you done the reps in the thing that you've set out to do? The tricky thing is, how does the person know it's the right stuff? Are they working with the person doing the right stuff? Because you don't want to be flogging away doing the same thing forever. But what we're saying, what the other thing is, what we're saying though, is if you are feeling better, that's some pretty good evidence in general. Not necessarily feeling better from a pain perspective, but feeling better in yourself and getting a bit stronger. As your mountain metaphor goes, there's a good chance you're on your way up the mountain.
Yeah. Because you brought up a good couple points there too. It's like, clinically, I don't want to drive myself crazy of like, are we just heading down the wrong road, or we haven't given enough time, dosage, and the right stuff for change? I do go a little crazy thinking about that because I'm like, because then your people will look to you to be like, well, what's going on? and then I have to say, I know from a principles perspective, if we do this, we should expect this. So let's keep going. Let's see.
It still comes back to evidence, doesn't it? It still comes back to evidence. I still want to see some evidence that is looking like it's going to change. Something that's shifting. And if it doesn't change, if there's no progress, I start to get a bit twitchy as a clinician. I'm not sure it's quite right here.
But that's where you need to be really smart as a clinician and work together with the person in front of you to set up the right set of measurables to actually know, are you headed in the right direction? I feel like we do a pretty shit job encouraging our people to actually set out and measure what the change is going to look like, or just track what they're doing in general. If you don't track it, then I have no idea what you do. You have no idea what you do. And so we get a result, and it's like, well, I don't know. I can't say for certain if, again, it's not changing because we're not doing the right thing, or it's not changing because you're not doing enough of the thing that you said you were going to do. So if you need to really be smart about setting up the right goals, the right measurables to inform whether or not you are heading in the right direction. Are you walking up the mountain, or are you just camping at base camp? Who knows? But yeah, that's
It,
go ahead.
if you're not testing, you're guessing. It's this
Yeah.
real quick saying that does ring true to me. I know it's been kicked down the road a little bit, and some people have almost counterpointed it and said, well, you can also achieve results without, big, expensive, objective testing kit. And I agree with that. I do agree with that. But I think fundamentally it's a concept that clinicians should be thinking about very early on in their career. How can I measure in one way or another? Some patients, I will throw the kitchen sink at it and I will get all the fancy kits out. Others, I'll just see how many calf raises they can do, or how many hops can you do, or what are you able, how much sleep are you getting on a consistent basis. So keeping it super simple. So I think it's just considering the person in front of me.
Where it gets tricky, I think, is it, and because some of the biggest breakthroughs I think that we need to help people make with persistent pain is in that more emotional, cognitive, how they think about and their pain and the fears they carry with their pain. How, I'm gonna, maybe I'll put you on the spot. How would you go about measuring changes in how they regulate emotions, how they change fears? How would you do that?
So I wouldn't say I have an objective measurement, but I really celebrate it in the session because I can sense it. I hear the way they talk about their pain and about the things they do and about the focus points in their life. And I celebrate it. I really grab it and I go, do you remember what in that first session and you were talking about the gym being this thing that you couldn't do because it was a scary place? Now you're telling me that you're going in the gym and you're frustrated the clips don't work. Like that. That is the progress you have made as a person now, going into the gym with confidence and making progress. So I just celebrate the moments with them and just really, because they're living it, they won't notice those ones so much. Whereas we see it in points, just the same as with anyone. You see a kid every year, you're like, wow, haven't you grown? The parents are like, no, they're pretty short actually for their age. But when you only see them once a year, they've always grown. So
That's right.
It's like that's what our job as coaches, by the way, I really believe coaches is the right word. Our job as coaches is to help them see the progress they've made when it might not be so clear for them.
That is cool. I totally agree with you. I think just the nature of how westernized societies, like how we set things up, is that we don't celebrate these small little wins, even cognitively, or things that we don't see enough, and they can be the things that create the ceilings to physical progress. But what I wanted to say, I certainly love that. One thing that I have done, I want to see what you think about this, is when it's often the case that people with chronic pain, they're going to be afraid of certain movements or certain tasks. And so I love to set up clinically scenarios that would emulate the scary thing, but do it in a way that, with my support, usually with cueing or even hands-on, like stuff to encourage more safety during the scary thing. It's a theme here. So, but then the homework is, okay, now you're gonna do that scary thing, but the evaluation is, okay, what were you feeling before, and what were you feeling during, and how did you respond, or how did you navigate some of the barriers that would come up? Because fears and these things are like, it's like a bad song that gets stuck in your head. Like you can't stop it. You can't stop the fear response from happening. It's automatic. It's there. It's just going to be there. It's like every time somebody says the word Nike, I think you just do it. Always. You can't not think it. So the fear happens, but it's how do you respond to the fear? Like, did you respond in a positive way, knowing what you know now? And then afterwards I have them track, like, okay, how did that experience go? And if you can create positive experiences with fearful movements over and over and over, again, maybe we're starting to teach the pain system, how to more properly respond. So what do you think about that? Like that is something I've done.
Yeah.
Mixed results, big time. Like,
Essentially, that's introspection, right? You're teaching them introspection. And what introspection can often do is it creates a better connection with what's going on and within themselves, but it also helps them to sometimes see errors within their thought processes and their feelings. It's like, hang on a minute, it is ultimately just the remote control I'm picking up off the ground. What is it about that feels so scary to me? And when they introspect, it doesn't always make the sense that it seemed to make in the moment. So I think the introspection you're getting at there is hugely powerful, and it can be for certain people when it is about that feeling, and the feeling perhaps isn't what they thought it was, or it does seem a little out of sync to what their new beliefs might be. That error created within the system, that is then the trigger for potential change. But hang on a minute, that's not what I thought it was. That doesn't need to be so scary anymore. And you layer those mini breakthroughs over time, and it compounds into some really powerful effects.
Yeah, I think, and maybe this is just my bias, but I think we do too little of that clinically. Like we spend far too little time focusing on the what, like just what exactly we're doing, but not. I would rather people focus on like the how, like how are you actually thinking about what you're doing? Like what's happening in here when we do this thing? And Charlie, why I think it's so powerful is that it's fear that brings them in the door. Like they are desperate and afraid of their future, what's happening now. And if you can figure out precisely what they are afraid of, and then create these experiments to dismantle the fear, I think you are an all-star clinician. But I think we just do it far too little. And again, you can't break the automatic response. So much is happening automatically. But what you want to do is you want to inject a different response. You want to override the system. Be like, okay, I'm afraid right now. My body's tensing up. I can feel that. I am feeling pain. But then what do you do? Like it's in that moment where you are picking a road towards safety or towards protection, or towards danger or towards safety. You're choosing a road, and the road you go down will predict: is the system going to stay sensitized? Is it going to just keep doing the same thing it's always been doing, producing more pain, which is just creating these feedback loops? Or are you going to break that cycle? And the irony here, Charlie, is that you have to go to the scary place. You have to go to the scary place in order to incite the change. You can't just avoid pain forever. You can't just avoid all the threats forever.
Well, you can, but what happens then is just either constant, you have to suffer forever, or massive deconditioning because of the avoidance of normal life. And that's deconditioning socially, deconditioning psychologically, deconditioning biologically.
And what is
the result?
What does that create ultimately? It's just like you are creating more suffering. The system perceives more danger, more threat, because you're less able to handle every aspect of your life. And so it's just that positive feedback loop again.
Two favorite questions in these situations is,
go ahead.
How does that feel to you? Or what are you feeling now? And then what does that mean to you? Because you're sparking that curiosity again. You're trying to find then the introspection and then the curiosity to find the answer. Hang on a minute, what does that mean to me? Why do I act like this? Because it's fishing out those beliefs. Is it because I'm terrified that my back's going to go again? Is it that my discs are going to crumble because I've seen the scan? Whatever it might be, whatever that belief is. And there's a good chance that belief is based on some genuine information that was provided, probably with good intention at some point, either by a loved one or a trusted one in the healthcare system. But that's our opportunity to talk through it and provide a different way of thinking about it, create some errors.
And you're so right. What a beautiful question. Like, what does that mean to you? Because it's the meaning the person assigns to the experience, which determines how they perceive it. Really, if it's if the meaning is, oh, yeah, as you just said, like my back's gonna go or something's gonna give way. Like what does that mean? Like what do you think's happening in there? Like, do you think your body is so fragile that it's it's just gonna fall apart when you're in my office here? Like, is that what prior experiences have you had that would suggest that you're not going to be okay? But but yeah, I agree. This whole fear topic is so important because I just wanted to share this quote that I don't know where it comes from, but it's such a it rings so true with everything, everything related to true change, which is the change you're looking for is in the cave that you seldom want to go into. Like the most profound change in your life exists in the cave that you refuse to go into. Everything is in there. You have to go in, you have to stare fear in the face, unfortunately. And it's what you do with that fear. It's how you act with that fear that incites change. And for better or worse. And I mean it takes a lot of bravery to do that. Like it's you can't be brave without fear. I mean, bravery is just fear or action in the face of fear, quite honestly. But I think if you can get to a point where people trust you enough to go there, then you are potentially creating the set of conditions that could ultimately lead them down that new path.
Yeah, we're going to go into trust, actually. That's a very important topic. But before we go there, so my version of what you were saying there is the comfort zone diagram. It's like just beyond the comfort zone is the fear zone. And just beyond the fear zone is the learning zone. And then when you go past that, you have growth. And then you have a new comfort zone. And you just keep going on and on and on. And that can be attributed to general learning, to, whatever. That is like a universal realism, truism for me. But it's fear. Fear has to be there. If it's not there, then it's probably not pushing you hard enough to be meaningful.
You're right, man. It is the compass towards growth. Like if you don't go there, then you will never know what's on the other side.
So to trust is a very, very important part of what we do, or a phenomenon that's incredibly powerful within what I'm trying to create within a first encounter, especially, but certainly ongoing. So if I've got a new client in front of me who is describing a persistent pain journey, I'm very aware that the only way that I'm going to help them is if they trust me first, because that person does not care what I know until they know that I care. So the way that I will try and get those things across is through developing a therapeutic alliance, therapeutic rapport, some level of trust from that person. And most people will have come across the findings that one of our most powerful treatment tools is the person liking us. So it's absolutely important that we get some level of, or at least respects us, maybe they don't like, they respect us. So we have to get that therapeutic rapport early on in order to get results. So tell us a bit about your methods. And this, we haven't spoken much about it actually, but your mentorship is communicate. You educate other therapists to communicate better so that they can be more effective clinicians. I myself was on that very course a couple of years ago, and I found it really, really powerful. And it's something I've always been interested in, and I thought I really want to sharpen those skills. And absolutely, I'd say it was a really effective way of me communicating better. So tell us a bit about some of the ways that you understand therapeutic alliance and how you communicate that to your communicate cohort.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, you started with trust, and I think that's an important word and an important topic, because trust, it comes from many sources in a therapeutic alliance. And I think there is an order of operations here. Like it's easy to think that trust is really going to come from your skill set and all the tools you have, people will trust that you know what you're doing. And that is certainly an avenue of trust. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to have knowledge in the skill set, and you need to deliver. But it's actually not the most important area. Like, where you have to start with trust is the empathy piece, which is showing that you are capable, from a cognitive empathy perspective, of putting yourself in their shoes and trying your best. I mean, there's arguments that you can't fully ever understand what it's like to walk in another person's shoes, and I get that totally. But if you try to project your best cognitive empathy and understand where they're coming from, and you can reflect that back to show that you've listened and you understand who they are, where they're coming from, and that you get them. That shows that you give a shit. You need to show that you care first. If they understand that you genuinely care and want them to be better and want them to change, that is the strongest source of trust. So I've mentioned two. The third source might be just continuing to show up and deliver over time. So those are like the three main sources of trust. Giving a damn, truly, genuinely, showing that you're on their team, your knowledge and skill set, and that you actually know what you're doing, and then showing up continually over and over and over again, doing what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to deliver a program, you do that. If you say you're going to email them or check in with them, you do that. Those are three main sources of trust. Why it's so important is that in order to get to the areas that you perhaps need to intervene upon the most, like we were just talking about fear, like I'm not going to go to a person and just be like, yeah, like, let me tell you like what my deepest, darkest fears are about this problem today. Some people do, but like some people you need to kind of massage that relationship a little bit in order for them to open up. The more they trust you, I think the main message should be that the more willingness they're going to be honest and open with you about how they're feeling. If things aren't working and they're not really happy with where things are going, they're going to tell you. They're not just going to not say something and then never show up again. So I think that it forms like a bit of a base and a foundation from which you can develop that therapeutic alliance, and everything has to be built on a sense of trust, because if you're dealing with pain and you're dealing with sensitive histories, you're dealing with sensitive topic areas, emotions, you need to be able to have their full trust in you and know that you have their back, so that they're actually going to be more willing participants when it comes to the things that are scary, are potentially fear-inducing, and could potentially even be things that reproduce pain. So in order to get there, they have to fully trust you first.
Yeah, and I think one of the other ways of describing the showing up and doing the things you said you're going to do is essentially integrity. Have integrity as a clinician. If you say you care, act like you care. If you say you're going to do something, really deliver, because that is a surefire way of losing trust super quick, is to not have integrity, because someone will just lose trust in you instantly. I think we know this in our real life, don't we? Our true friends are the ones that show up time after time for us. And if they don't do that, we will start to drift away from them as friends because we don't have trust in them. And then there's also this other reality of the clinical world, is that empathy burnout is a real thing, and many, many people suffer from this, especially in the modern way that healthcare is delivered as physiotherapists. Certainly in our NHS system, it's set up to essentially foster empathy burnout. There's not enough time for people to deliver good quality care. There's not enough recovery for the clinician. The environment is energy sapping. So people do struggle to provide empathy or have empathy time after time after time. And one of the ways of protecting ourselves is actually to think of it more as a compassion act. So an act of compassion. So empathy is the feeling, and we sure need to have that feeling of empathy in order to act compassionately. But once you have done your act in order to service that person one way or another, where it's giving them a bit of information, whether it's giving them an exercise program or sending them some information, whatever it might be, that is your act that helps you to sort of close the door on
Yes.
that emotion. So there is an end point to it. So it doesn't drift on into the rest of your day. It doesn't hang over you, which is one of the reasons I try and get my notes done on the day so it doesn't hang over me. So one of the reasons I try and send my exercises very shortly after it so I can close the door on that case to protect myself, essentially. Firstly, it's to have integrity, do the thing I said I'm going to do so I don't forget. But secondly, it also acts as a doorway for me. I've finished with that case, move on to my next one. Otherwise, it just becomes exhausting.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of wisdom that you just shared, and you're right. I do feel for people in certain healthcare systems that are just struggling, and it even to do what you just suggested in a day where you are maybe have to see 20 plus people is crazy. It's really hard to shut that door, and I think it's unfortunate. I really do feel for clinicians in those environments. I mean, here in Canada, we have certainly a similar set of circumstances with our healthcare system, where just certain clinics are, they're run like factories, and they're just kind of getting people in and out of the doors, and you're afforded so little time to make an impact, and it can be very discouraging, to put it lightly. And I do think you have to, really look at yourself. I mean, you mentioned the word integrity. You got to think, is this the avenue I want to be delivering care for forever? And is this sustainable? And can I look at myself in the mirror when I get home and before I go to sleep and think like, I gave what I needed to give today. And I again, it's really hard when certain people might feel a bit trapped in certain clinical environments and systems that don't allow them to make any change. And I mean, the solutions are not, they're simple, but they're not easy. A lot of the solutions are like, get out and create the clinical environment that you dream of and wish to see. But there's a lot of risk and fear behind that too. So I don't have an easy solution to some of these environments, Charlie, but I do see it time and time again. You mentioned my mentorship. Seemingly every mentorship and I'm dealing with clinicians around the world, they always, without fail, will tell me how they can't kind of do this stuff at a high level given the time constraints that they have, because advocating for a heightened skill set in communication takes a lot of work and a lot of energy, at least at first, like any new skill set. And I don't know what to tell them. I'm just like, well, you and it feels so lazy and shitty of me to say, well, just do your best. Do your best given the constraints that you have. And I will sometimes say, like, you don't have to do everything in one session. You can carry sessions through, but again, like, you really lose the magic of one session if you have to wait a week to see them again. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I do struggle with my messaging for clinicians because I feel for them.
If I spin it back to the patient here, because I agree with you, when I consider it from the clinician's end and from the healthcare system's end, I don't see a solution that beyond the risk, the risk of taking on your own project, like we have both done. There is huge risk attached to that, and I certainly wasn't ready to do that younger in my career. So if I just take it from that perspective, I think all we can hope for is that politicians improve the healthcare system from the top, and that drifts down over time. But that's many, many years away, probably decades away, if ever. So if I then flip it back on the patient who may well be suffering, the things I would encourage the patient is that if you notice that you're in a system in which the person in front of you cannot deliver high quality care and they are not doing the things that we have spoken about in this episode, you should move. You should find someone else who can do those things. And that may mean that you have to go beyond the NHS. It may mean that you have to go outside of your insurance bubble. And look, the the clinic that I run, we see some insurance cases, but most of what we see is self-funded. And the reason being, we see people for an hour to make sure that we can deliver good quality. Now, that isn't going to be for everyone. And that's one of the reasons why I kept up with this podcast project, because I wanted to be able to give this information out to anyone, that they could just have access to our information for free, either on our podcast or on social media.
Sure.
But ultimately, I knew when I looked myself in the mirror at the end of the day, I could only deliver high quality care if I was seeing people for an hour consistently. And if I wasn't seeing people back to back 30 minutes at a time for days on end, because that did sap my energy, and I was suffering with empathy burnout at various points in my career when that was the reality. So for my best interest, and therefore my patient's best interest, I created a business where I could deliver high quality care day in, day out. But that isn't that easy to do for most people. So I agree. I don't have all the answers, far from it. But if I look at it from a patient's perspective, I would just encourage them to really think, are they getting what they need from the person in front of them? It may not be their fault, but perhaps they need to then look elsewhere.
Yeah, well said. And I think there's a couple truths to pull out of that. And one of them is that you can't help everybody. And unfortunately, like, if you set up a clinic and a system and a space that demands like a certain level of finance because of the timing and the care that you do deliver, like, I would expect that your services would come at a higher premium, but of course they should. And I feel like you should feel good as a clinician about delivering high-end care and charging what you feel you deserve to charge. But it might be out of the realm of possibility for certain people. To that same end, we live in an age now where you have access to everything. And so unfortunately, a lot of the access to information, if you go through social media in a healthcare sphere, is not so great. But I think with a little bit of savvy, and again, coming back to where we started with the narratives that you, and the lens that you approach your pain with, if you take personal responsibility and find out more about anything, about pain, about rehabilitation, about what things do and don't work for persisting pain, what are principles that tend to be impactful, and take an honest look at your own life and think, am I trying to learn more? Am I applying myself? Am I seeking out, if it's not a clinician that I can afford right now, am I seeking out information so that when I do access somebody, I know what to do, I know what to ask? And I feel like there is a level of responsibility that you need to take, because it is your body, it is your life, it is your health. And if you're not going to take responsibility, then who will?
Yeah. I think that's a really lovely message to finish the main part of today's podcast. I've got a few things written down here, and I referenced my research this morning. So what I'm going to do here, just to get some quick, because there's so much we haven't covered here, and I know that we can't go on all day. I'd love to, but we can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire through some topics that I was writing down, and at the end of it, I want you to pick 3 to elaborate on. Okay. So this is from 2017, by the way. So you were speaking the gold from 2017. So fair play, by the way. It's very impressive. So number 1, no such thing as perfect posture. Number 2, we've covered already, humans aren't machines. Number 3, don't fear failure. Number 4, treat with a net, not a pole. And this was my kitchen sink analogy, I think. So I think that covers that. The core stability myth, passive treatment versus active treatment. More people with chronic pain, so more people on pain meds than smoke. Perception of body maps and alignment. GPs not referring to physio, biopsychosocial model, and then some metaphors about pain. So
many.
Yeah, well, it was all good. This is the problem. I was writing it all down thinking this is interesting, blah, blah, blah. But what do you think? Take a few shots at some of those hot topics.
Okay. Yeah, let's start with core stability, because I think that grew out of it grows out of a belief that your lower back and your trunk area, if you have back pain, then it's caused by some sort of weakness in the system, be it the abdominal wall, the low back musculature, or any of that kind of pelvic girdle musculature. Again, what we know about any persisting lower back pain is that any general exercise program does just as well as any exercise aimed at your core. And so it's not that we should throw out core exercises altogether, because I think they have a place and they have good utility. And I think
agree.
they're a good, useful entry point, especially if people carry narratives that where they believe they need more core stability. Why not do something that looks like a core exercise? Sure, we can follow that narrative at least to start, but you can guarantee that I'm going to be challenging you clinically throughout all that. The problem I see, Charlie, is that if you take that belief again to the extremes when you're living it with chronic back pain, what I tend to see is that people turn their bloody core musculature on for every single thing they do, even walking or just standing around. And I love Peter O'Sullivan's like little metaphor where he's using the clenched fist, like the relaxed wrist, just like, how does that feel? It feels really good. Okay, turn your core on. And move your wrist around where you're all stiff and turned on. And I was like, okay, like why wouldn't you clench your fist all day long when you're doing writing tasks? So that's what you're doing with your low back. And again, now you're wondering why. Again, adding load, adding pressure, adding stress on the system all day long, and you're wondering why you're still sore, and you're wondering why your back pain persists. Well, maybe this is one of the reasons.
However, every now and again, you need to open a jar. And to open that jar, you need your core strength.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah? So, but you don't need to open jars day in, day out.
100%. But so even still though, it pisses me off because you don't need to consciously think about turning your wrist muscles on when you open a jar. Just like you don't need to consciously turn your back muscles on when you lift a couch. I mean, sure, if we're talking about like a high level max effort load, sure, brace, co-contract, like it's probably the better, safer way to perform at a higher level. Sure, I'm with you. But we're talking about everyday tasks. We're talking about sitting in a chair. Like, let your belly be a belly. Like, let it loose.
Slouch.
Let it
Treat yourself.
let it all out. Yeah, slouch. What were some other topics? You talked about
That potentially leads us into posture.
posture.
Yeah.
Oh man, where to begin? Posture is a totally human created thing, a human created phenomenon. Again, we are complex biological systems. We are adaptive. We're not meant to stay in one place. Our bodies and movement systems are healthiest when they are in motion, turns out, because we are hardwired for survival. It turns out you need to move and navigate the earth to survive. Earth is not a straight line. Our lives are not a straight line. You do not need to live in a straight line. Staying in any one position for too long is likely to create pain. That includes sitting up in a chair. It includes standing up straight as attention. It includes, like your grandmother said, sit up with your shoulders back, head elevated. If you stay there too long, you will be sore. If you slouch too long, you will be sore. If you lay down in any one position, you will be sore. There are people who, if you don't move, you set yourself up for just stress concentrations in certain areas and breakdown over time. Like, think about laying down on a bed. If you were trapped in one position for too long, you get bed sores. So your whole system is geared for motion. The main message should be your best posture is your next posture. Move variably, move often. Don't spend any one time in one position too long. That should be the main message. Gosh, don't get don't let posture stress you out. It's the stress of being in the position that probably is more of a problem than the actual position.
Yeah. Yeah. And the last thing you should be thinking about if you are not in pain is your posture.
No shit. Yeah.
Don't worry about
Exactly. Yeah. No shit. That's right. Oh man. And everybody has bad posture. Okay, great. Me too. I love how I'm like typing away, like slouching as people are. I'm just like, look at me.
it. I do it
I
as
was like,
well.
I feel pretty good right now.
Swiveling around on my swivel chair without a back and showing off my slump. Yeah. I
Nice.
feel good. I feel good. But luckily, physios were up and down, moving around anyway. It's a natural profession for living that truth, which is good.
Yeah. The other one you mentioned was metaphors for pain.
Yeah. Pain metaphors.
I mean, we talked about a few today. Like I like the balance scale of danger and safety. I think that's a useful entry point to get people to understand that pain is multifactorial, and again, there's kitchen sink and many things we can throw at it. Again, that gardener analogy is just like,
And I love that. I think I got that from you, actually. I hate to big you up again, but I'm pretty sure I got that from one of your posts a few years ago. So it really is good.
It captures us as biological systems so well. And just like when you look at a plant and it's not thriving, you don't like, you could, but you don't necessarily intervene with the plant. You look at the ecosystem that the plant is existing in and change variables there. Is it are the soil conditions right? Is there enough nutrition in the soil? Is there the right amount of sun and rain? So you need good stress and bad stress, and you need to recover. And yeah, it's just, I think if we thought more about health from that lens, we would be so much better off, because you take pressure off yourself. Like, if your biological system knows what to do, just give it the right conditions and it will solve itself. Like, go to fucking bed, please. Like, so go to sleep, get more water, do things that bring you joy and happiness, do things that de-stress you, find those things out. Move your body. Those are good conditions. Those are some good kind of measuring points and starting points. If you do all those things and do those things consistently and you still feel like shit, I feel like you might be a liar. Like, you might be lying. Like, come on. Like, you're either lying to yourself or you're lying to me. It's like, you can lie to me all you want, but that's my favorite analogy. I think it speaks to everything that I do clinically. It speaks to my whole approach to just understanding myself as a person, understanding my health. And it's so beautiful because you start to understand that you're not an individual. You are a biological thing surrounded by an environment, surrounded by social things, social creatures, friends, family, loved ones, work, and all this stuff impacts you, whether you like it or not. And if you can change some of those environmental constraints, you will change how you feel. Promise. And one of those other things is just here, like how you think about things, and that's another part of your environment.
I love it. I think it's a really beautiful analogy to use, and so universal. Let's finish off on something that is very common in our clinic, which is people that have pain and no clear structural damage. And how do you help people understand that? Because they are coming from a biomedical viewpoint, a society that deems pain related to tissue damage. So how would you explain that in a few ways for the person in front of you?
I think the wrong thing to do is to give data, is to like show research and be like, well, we have all this data from all these people who don't have pain, and they show the same structural changes on the inside, and so we can't ever be sure whether it's relevant or not to you. And I think that's the wrong approach. That's a very bad thing to do, because people will be like, well, I'm different. Uh, what and again, Charlie, maybe you feel similarly, but I feel like when people show up to me in my clinical environments, they've already been, especially with persisting pain, they've already been through a lot. And so they've tried a lot of things for the area or the thing that they think is wrong in their body. And I usually ask them, well, I mean, you've tried all these different treatment techniques for that suspected thing. How is that? I mean, I sound kind of like a prick, but how's that going? Maybe it could be that you're thinking about this all wrong. Maybe there could be more to the picture here that you haven't considered before. Are you open to maybe seeing things a different way? So again, curiosity, questioning, opening it up, seeing if they're actually willing to visit the conversation of why pain can happen in absence of structural pathology. Or what is maybe more common, Charlie, I think, is normal tissue aging that gets labeled in the biomedical system as pathology. And I think we have no way of knowing whether it's just tissues that have been around the sun for a few decades versus something that is injurious and damaged. But we know that if something is truly injured, your body will respond in a very predictable set of circumstances. There will be a mechanism of injury, truly. There will be something that happened beforehand that could explain why you have pain. There'll be pain, there'll be associated neuroendocrine and inflammatory changes. There will be signs that your body shows that something has happened at a tissue-based level. And if you're swollen or red or hot, and there are changes in temperature and your body's mobilizing its repair systems, then you can say quite comfortably, like, hey, yeah, like there is perhaps an injury here. But if those things are not there, we as clinicians can show them. You're like, look it, I'm looking at this area, I'm feeling, I'm touching, and there's no obvious sign to me that your body has mobilized a defense, which it would do if there was a true injury. Also, you're telling me from your story that you don't remember anything really happening. You don't remember anything or any force that was imposed on your body that would be sufficient to cause a true tissue pathology. Bending over and tying your shoe.
What happens?
Go ahead. Yeah.
They did have a moment, but it was so long ago. The healing process has to have happened by now. And I call people out on this a lot as well.
Me too.
And I remind them that the pattern in the early months of your injury would have been very different to the pattern in your later months. And you may not have fully noticed that, but I bet you remember what it felt like in those first few weeks or first few days, and now what it feels like and how often even at rest you're feeling it, whereas I bet you didn't feel it at rest so much in those middle phases. So yeah, it's just that clinical pattern. What does it sound like? What is it behaving like? And you're just drawing that analogy or that conclusion based on the evidence.
That's right. It's so good. And I think just pointing out obvious things that people hadn't considered before, like if people, especially if you can pull on threads of people's lives that they would have experienced, like if you've ever fallen before and scraped your elbow, right? And 3 months later, is the scrape still there? Why not? Right? So you're telling me that your body knew how to mount a defense and heal that injury in the skin and in the subcutaneous tissue. Great. Why do you think it's any different on the inside?
Yeah. And there's some other nice ones as well. Have you ever finished a sporting event, played football, played rugby, or whatever it might be, and you go, where on earth did that bruise come from?
That's right.
It's like there is a genuine tissue damage and you didn't feel it. Or the other ones or some of the literature ones, which I still tell this story now, and I've been telling it for many years, of the nail that goes through the boot, out the other side. The guy is in immense pain. and they take off the boot in hospital and it missed his toes. The moment he sees missed his toes, his pain goes away. His system had the evidence in front of it that it should protect itself with pain, and then the evidence changes. Or the phantom limb pain explanation of you can understand that someone without a limb, for whatever reason, can still experience symptoms in that very limb. And then people, there's just that moment of like,
there's no more limb
that way.
There's no damage left. There's no more limb.
Yeah. So I like some of those stories just to grab some attention and just to get someone to go, wow, okay, and just to think about it, to rethink.
Yeah, just to encourage like that there is more to the story, that there is, and I don't want to get too lost because people, like the normal pain system. If you have an acute injury, you mounted a fence, it should get painful, it should heal, pain should subside as tissues heal, and then it should go back to its normal. Like it again, the biomedical model of pain is correct in a lot of cases. It's just not the full picture. And I think that needs to be the message for people who've been dealing with pain for a long, long period of time, and they've been using this biomedical, reductionistic, single factor thinking narrative. Okay, time for a new point of view. Let's get bigger about how we think about your pain, and let's get excited about all the things that could be in front of you and all the roads you could travel to change and forge a new path towards a new you, because you can do this. We've seen it before. I've seen it in my practice. You're not special. You can do this.
We've come a full circle there, and it's a lovely way to finish the episode, because really it all rests on hope, doesn't it? We are dealing with hope. We have to convince that person that we're the right person for them. We have to create an environment that fosters healing and fosters safety within that system, that protective system. And we have to generate trust, and we have to do all these things as clinicians. It's complicated, and that's why you run a mentorship, and it's why it's taken me many, many years to feel comfortable treating people with complex, persistent pain problems. But that's what this episode was about, is trying to give people some other ways of thinking, some hope if they are suffering themselves, some tips, some ways of speaking, some metaphors, some analogies. And I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and I'm really grateful for you coming on all the way from Canada. So we've taken a bit of a leap of faith. This is our first one, video online for a long, long time. It's also, if it goes well, we'll do a few more, because there's a lot of other international guests I'd love to speak to. So thanks for taking that leap of faith with me. I know you've got up relatively early today to get yourself ready. Nick, we do have a bit of a tradition on this podcast. So our tagline is "Better Never Ends." And I just wondered if you had a little, what does better never ends mean to you, either in your life or in your practice? How is that encapsulated for you?
Yeah, it is. I do really love your brand, by the way, and your message. I think it is beautiful. Something that came up in my head just now, and it's come up time and time again, even just with our conversation today, is that we are in a perpetual process of change. And I think there is no ceiling for improving yourself, whether it be in a health realm, in a personal relationship realm, in a knowledge realm. It's so cliche, but you should just become obsessed and enjoy the process of it all. Enjoy the process of improvement, because as you know now that you're a living biological system, if you give the system the right conditions, inputs, and variables, it will change and self-organize favorably and move towards whatever targets that you're aiming at. But there may not ever be a ceiling to that endpoint, and that's a beautiful thing. So enjoy it all, keep improving, keep doing your thing, and make moves.
Wonderful. And how would someone find you, Nick?
Yeah, the best way to find me, Charlie, is just on Instagram. My tag is at Hannah, HANNAH moves. And yeah, you can learn about my mentorship just through that.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a long time coming for me because I've been following your stuff for many, many years. So thanks so much.
Yeah, of course. It was pleasure's all mine. And yeah, we can do it again. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Better, provider of health and wellness services in central London. We really believe that we can help people feel better and live better. You can book in for face-to-face services at any of our 3 London clinics. We have one in Marylebone, one in Soho, and one in the city. You can also follow us on Instagram at Better Never Ends, or head over to our website for more information about the clinics or the podcast at www.betterneverends.com.